3 patrol cars hemmed me into my own driveway while my kids watched from the front porch. Across the street, my neighbor, HOA royalty and self-appointed neighborhood warden, stood with her phone still in hand, giving the dispatcher a blow-by-blow account of my military intimidation tactics for the crime of parking in front of my own house. Fresh asphalt from the roadwork mingled with diesel from my government-issue pickup as the officers walked up, hands resting on their belts. "Sir, we received a complaint about threatening behavior," one of them said, voice carefully neutral. On the sidewalk, Linda Ashford wore that pinched little smile some people get when they're certain they've finally put you in your place. What she didn't know was that the man she just tried to have arrested was the same one who'd be sitting across from her at her next command appearance, and that this phone call was about to detonate her life. What would you do if a neighbor called the cops on you for blocking your own driveway? My name is Colonel Marcus Fricks. 3 months ago, I thought my biggest challenge was commanding 12,000 soldiers at Fort Carson, Colorado. Turned out I was wrong. One 52-year-old HOA treasurer named Linda Ashford would prove more troublesome than any insurgent I ever dealt with in 3 tours in Afghanistan. The crunch of gravel under my combat boots had become part of my morning ritual. Every day at 0630, I walked the perimeter of our property in the Maplewood subdivision, checking fences, sight lines, and gates. With my wife Sarah deployed to Germany and 10-year-old twins Jake and Emma to raise on my own, that quiet slice of suburbia needed to function like a safe zone. Add my 73-year-old father's worsening dementia, and you'll understand. Peace at home wasn't a luxury. It was mission critical. Dad served in Vietnam, earned a Purple Heart, and now some mornings he stares right through me, the son who followed him into uniform. But if he hears my command voice calling PT times down the hallway, his spine straightens. The smell of coffee at 0530, strong enough to dissolve a spoon, reminds him of field kitchens half a century ago. For a few minutes, his eyes clear and he's back in country. Then 6 months ago, Linda moved in across the street. Her husband had just been passed over for a $2.3 million base maintenance contract. From day one, she made it clear she viewed military families as an infestation driving down property values with our transient lifestyle. Never mind that I'd owned my house for 8 years, longer than most civilians on the block. She drove a white BMW SUV, parked each day at the exact same angle like she was lining up for inspection. Her lawn looked like a PGA practice green, and she wore one of those polished, brittle smiles that materialize only when she wants something from you. The first incident hit on a Tuesday in September. I'd parked my F-150 in my driveway, slightly angled to give the kids more room for their bikes. I was mentally double-checking the day's training schedule when I heard heels striking pavement like incoming fire. Linda marched across the street, phone clutched like an evidence bag. Her manicure probably cost more than some of my privates made in a day, and those glossy nails tapped furiously as she snapped pictures of my truck. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a military base," she announced, pitching her voice to maximum projection. The kind you hear from people who peaked as high school student government officers. That truck blocks sight lines for emergency vehicles. The irony being that her BMW was roughly the size of a landing craft. I kept my tone calm, the same one we use with hostile locals we still need to get intel from. "Ma'am, this is my private property. Military personnel have to follow civilian regulations like everyone else," she snapped, already dialing. "Hello, police? I need to report intimidating behavior from a neighbor who thinks his uniform gives him special privileges." 20 minutes later, Officer Martinez pulled up. He knew me from community liaison meetings, knew my record, knew this whole thing was as absurd as a helmet made of jello. But procedure is procedure. He asked the required questions, casting me apologetic looks as he went through the checklist. Behind him, Linda nodded along like a dashboard bobblehead, satisfied she'd held me accountable. That night, I stood on my back deck listening to cottonwood leaves whisper in the breeze while Dad tended his tomato plants. The one activity that still cut through his mental fog. His hands, lined and scarred, moved automatically, staking vines with the same efficiency he once used to field strip an M16 blindfolded. "Marcus," he said suddenly, voice clearer than usual. That woman reminds me of the political officers in Saigon. Same eyes. Same itch to control everybody for no damn reason. Even through his dementia, Dad had Linda pegged. After that, I started noticing things. Linda always seemed to be at her front window around school pickup, phone in hand like she was running surveillance. She had an uncanny knack for stepping outside exactly when military families were in their yards. The pattern of her first complaint nagged at me. It was too technical, too specific. 23 years in military intelligence trains you to recognize systematic behavior. This wasn't random neighbor friction. It was targeted harassment with deliberate planning behind it. The manila folder on my desk labeled Ashford, Linda incident documentation, thickened by the week. By the following Thursday, that folder contained 7 HOA violation notices filed in 10 days. Military vehicle in residential driveway. Apparently my F-150 counted as combat hardware. Excessive noise during quiet hours. Translation: I started my truck at 0630 for PT. Unauthorized fence modification. I'd reattached a loose board on my own fence because it was a safety hazard. These weren't casual gripes from a cranky neighbor. They were scalpels, each citation referencing obscure subclauses buried deep in the HOA bylaws, the kind most residents never knew existed. Someone had gone through those covenants line by line looking for weapons. Linda had weaponized bureaucracy with the efficiency of a staff officer drafting operations orders. I spread the printed violations across my home office, the sharp tang of toner in the air, and studied them the way I used to analyze enemy radio traffic. Different subsections cited. Different alleged witnesses. Different times of day. This wasn't outrage. It was case building. The real escalation hit Friday evening. Emma burst through the front door, 8-year-old face crumpled, tears streaming like someone had crushed her favorite toy. "Daddy," she choked. "Mrs. Ellie said I can't be safety patrol captain anymore because our family might move away soon." Anger hit my tongue like metal. I dropped to my knees to meet her eyes, keeping my voice even when all I wanted was to drive my fist through drywall. "Who told her we're moving, sweetheart?" "Some moms at the school meeting," she sniffed. "They said military families are trans something. That we shouldn't get important jobs, 'cause we don't really belong here." "Transient," Jake supplied, stepping in behind her. His fists were balled tight, knuckles white. "Tommy Morrison's mom said we're just passing through and taking chances away from real families." I pulled them both into a hug, feeling their bodies shake with hurt and confusion they should never have had to carry. Their sniffling mixed with the drone of the evening news, forming a background track of quiet injustice. Over their heads, I saw Dad watching from his recliner, eyes sharp again, giving me a slow nod. The same one he used to give when he'd spotted something off in our old neighborhood and wanted me to pay attention. After I got the kids tucked in and swore to them we weren't going anywhere, I brewed coffee strong enough to wake a platoon and open my laptop. If Linda wanted an intelligence war, she'd just engage someone with over 2 decades in the trade. First stop: HOA records for the past 2 years, all publicly accessible if you knew where to click. Most people don't realize HOA boards are legally required to track every violation. The complainant's name, dates, alleged infractions, and outcomes. It's essentially open access to their communication logs, which meant every complaint Linda had ever filed existed in a neat digital trail. Within an hour, the pattern glowed on my screen like heat signatures on thermal imaging. Military families made up 23% of the neighborhood, but we received 73% of all written violations. Civilians got friendly reminders for the same infractions that earned us formal citations and fines. Master Sergeant Rodriguez next door, 8 violations in 6 months, including excessive lawn maintenance for keeping his yard to base standards. Captain Williams across the way, 12 violations in 4 months, one for intimidating decorations because his American flag exceeded the size allowed by city code. Lieutenant Bailey on Maple Court, 15 violations in 3 months, including disruptive vehicle operation, because his diesel truck started early for PT. The data alone was ugly, but intel without ground truth is just numbers. I needed eyes-on confirmation, Saturday's recon jog provided it. Linda's fence had the exact same unauthorized modification I'd been cited for, installed 6 months earlier, with 0 violations on record. Her husband's diesel roared louder than a generator at 0645 every morning and somehow never triggered a noise complaint. By Sunday night, I documented a pattern of discriminatory enforcement that would have made any civil rights attorney start drafting motions. But I needed to know how far her operation extended and who else she'd recruited. Monday brought incoming fire at closer range. Emma came home clutching a crumpled permission slip for the gifted and talented program she'd tested into 2 months before, scoring in the 95th percentile. They said there might not be room after all, she whispered, staring at the floor. Her backpack smelled of crayons and disappointment. Jake's news was worse. 3 military kids had been removed from student government roles because, according to a new parent advisory committee, families without long-term housing stability shouldn't hold positions that required ongoing commitment to school community values. I read that sentence twice, jaw-clenching. Poison was spreading through the school system, and I had a solid guess about who was stirring the pot. My coffee mug hit the counter hard enough that Sarah, if she'd been home, would have recognized the sound. It's the one I make when I shift from irritation to full operational mode. The school board meeting Wednesday confirmed my suspicions. I sat in the back of the fluorescent-lit room and watched Linda work like a politician running for mayor of Entitlement City. She'd organized a group called the Concerned Mothers Coalition, 6 women who'd anointed themselves guardians of educational stability. In a Navy blazer broadcasting, "I need to speak to your supervisor." Linda took the podium with professionally printed handouts and a color-coordinated presentation. "Military families, while we certainly appreciate their service," she began, laying on the fake sincerity thick enough to choke on, "introduce instability into our children's learning environment. Constant relocations, deployment stress, and, frankly, behavioral issues from combat exposure create disruptions that impact all our kids." She actually made air quotes around behavioral issues when talking about veterans. In public, at a school board meeting. Her slideshow was slick. Stats about military family mobility, cherry-pick studies on deployment stress, charts showing test score variance in districts with high military populations. It looked like professional-grade character assassination wrapped in concern. Most civilians have no idea how to counter that kind of polished misinformation, especially when it's delivered by someone who looks like their own PDA president. Then she made her tactical error. "Take Colonel Hricks's family, for example," she said, pointing in my general direction without quite looking at me. "There have been constant complaints from neighbors about intimidation tactics, property violations, and now his children are struggling to adapt to civilian school expectations. This is exactly the sort of disruptive influence we must minimize." Copper flooded my mouth. She had just turned her public campaign directly on my kids using lies and half-truths as ammunition. That's when I realized Linda wasn't just harassing one household. She was running a full-spectrum campaign against every military family in the district, with the school system as her main weapon. Time to expand my intel collection beyond Maplewood. Thursday morning, I started calling other families from base. Word travels fast through military networks when someone starts targeting our own. What I learned chilled me more than a January wind on the Nebraska plains. 12 families across 3 different subdivisions were experiencing the same pattern: selective enforcement from HOAs, sudden school concerns, and quiet exclusion from community activities. Captain Martinez in Pinewood Estates. Both kids dropped from soccer teams because of anticipated scheduling conflicts during future deployments. Major Thompson in Cedar Ridge. His daughter removed from Honor Society because military families may not demonstrate sufficient long-term community commitment. Sergeant First Class Johnson in Oakwood. His son denied scholarship opportunities after committees questioned residential stability. Staff Sergeant Williams in Riverside. His family excluded from block parties after neighbors complained that military culture was too intense for casual gatherings. This wasn't isolated neighbor drama. It was coordinated psychological warfare meant to push military families out by making civilian life unlivable. Harassment campaigns like this don't run themselves. They require coordination, shared talking points, and a central organizer. Translation: someone was running an operation. I already knew her name. That weekend, I built what we call a network analysis, link charts connecting events, people, and timelines across neighborhoods. Linda's name appeared in 85% of the documented cases, either directly or via concerned citizen comments that sparked official action. The real breakthrough came when I overlaid those harassment dates with base contract timelines. The story that emerged was uglier than anything I'd seen downrange. September 15th. Base maintenance contracts announced. September 18th. First HOA violations filed against military families in Maplewood. October 3rd. Linda's husband formally notified he'd lost the contract. October 5th. The Concerned Mothers campaign against military students launched. This wasn't random friction. This was payback. Monday morning, Linda escalated again. I was loading backpacks into my truck when I saw her in her driveway, phone raised, recording like she was filming a true crime special. "Morning, Linda," I called, staying cordial. No reply. She kept her camera trained on me while narrating into the phone. "Yes, that's him right there. You can see the intimidation tactics, the way he parks that military vehicle, the aggressive body language. My neighbors and I don't feel safe." She was literally live commentating my morning routine as I loaded school supplies. The scent of fresh pine from a nearby Christmas tree lot clashed with the absurd surveillance theater happening 10 yards away. "Daddy, why is Mrs. Ashford taking pictures of us?" Jake asked. "Some people have too much time on their hands," I told him, giving Linda a bright wave. "Smile for the camera." That afternoon, the situation leveled up. Officer Martinez showed up again with a stack of papers thick as a field manual. "Colonel, I'm really sorry," he said, looking at. "We've got multiple reports of harassment, stalking, and intimidation. I have to ask if you've been conducting surveillance on Mrs. Ashford's property." I brought him inside, poured coffee, and slid my documentation folder across the table. "Take a look at this timeline, Martinez. See anything interesting?" He spent 20 minutes reviewing my charts, his expression darkening. "This is systematic," he finally said. "She's filing new reports faster than we can process the old ones. 3 false police reports in 1 week," I confirmed, "all claiming I'm stalking her, while my security cameras show I haven't been within 50 feet of her property. Most people don't realize this. File more than 2 provably false police reports in a month, and you trigger an automatic review for abusive process." Linda had just walked herself into that tripwire. Then came the nuke. I was in my home office midweek, working through quarterly training reports, when my phone rang. "Colonel Hicks, this is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Webb from Base Security. We've received some concerning reports about your fitness for command. I need you to come in for an interview." Blood roared in my ears. "Ma'am, what reports specifically?" I asked, already knowing. "Multiple civilian complaints about aggressive behavior, neighbor intimidation, and possible PTSD-related incidents. There are also allegations you're using your position to retaliate against local authorities." Her tone said she didn't buy it, but protocol doesn't care about opinions. Every complaint against a senior officer has to be investigated. Linda had taken her campaign off the cul-de-sac and into the chain of command, trying to torpedo my career with fabricated mental health and misconduct allegations. That alone would have been serious. But things were about to get worse. Base rumor chains move faster than any civilian gossip line, and by Thursday evening Captain Rodriguez called with intel that tied everything together. "Marcus, you need to hear this," he said, voice tight. "My wife works at district offices. Linda's been coordinating with 3 other women to deliberately go after military families across multiple school districts. The conspiracy had tentacles. Her inner circle included Barbara Ellie on the school board, Margaret White in city planning, Susan Torres at the county zoning commission. They've got a shared document," Rodriguez continued, spreadsheet color-coded by family, notes on deployment dates, vulnerable points, and which complaints work best on which people. They'd turned harassment into a science, data-driven targeting that would have impressed some folks at the Pentagon if it hadn't been aimed at our own. Friday morning, Linda made the mistake that broke her operation. I was backing out of my driveway when she sprinted from her front door, phone already at her ear, and planted herself directly behind my truck. "He's trying to run me over," she screamed. "Send police immediately. This veteran is having a mental breakdown and threatening civilians." My backup camera caught everything. Linda calmly stepping into my blind spot, then performing for the phone like she was up for an award. What she didn't know was that my exterior cameras had already recorded the lead-up, including her talking into her phone before she approached my truck. "This should be the final complaint we need," she told whoever was on the line. "Once they remove him from base command, we can get the rest of these military families out of our neighborhood." There it was in her own voice. A confession to conspiracy, intent, and her true objective. Game over if I could prove the larger network. Saturday morning, I replayed that recording in my home office, coffee in hand, while her own words filled the room. "This should be the final complaint we need. Once they remove him from base command, we can get the rest of these military families out of our neighborhood." In 23 years of intel work, I'd rarely seen anyone hand over that much self-incrimination so cleanly. On that one clip alone, she'd admitted to coordinated efforts to remove a military officer from command, systematic harassment based on protected status, intentional filing of false police reports to damage a career. When I enhanced the audio, I caught something else. She wasn't monologuing. There was someone on the other end responding. I spent the rest of the weekend doing what we call multi-source fusion, combining my evidence with material from other families. When I finished, the picture was clear. Linda wasn't just a spiteful neighbor. She was effectively acting as operations chief for a campaign to push military families out of civilian communities across multiple jurisdictions. The compiled file would have made any intel analyst proud. 67 distinct harassment incidents against 12 families. 43 false or misleading complaints to authorities. 28 apparent violations of federal protections for military families. 1 recorded confession of conspiracy. Most civilians don't know this. When you target service members or their families because of their status, you're not just violating HOA rules. You're colliding head-on with federal law. Linda had waltzed from petty nuisance into federal criminal territory without ever realizing the line existed. Monday, Lieutenant Colonel Webb called me back with news that shifted this from bad harassment case to national security concern. "Marcus, we've been looking into those complaints filed against you," she said, all business. "In the process, we uncovered something else. The same people have been trying to access classified adjacent data, family addresses, deployment schedules, personnel rosters." My chest went cold. "They're harvesting intelligence on military families?" "Yes. We traced multiple information requests to a network documenting military family movements, children's school schedules, spouse employment, home security measures. This isn't casual nosiness. It's reconnaissance." Linda's obsession suddenly made grim sense. She wasn't just making us miserable. She was building a vulnerability map. "Ma'am," I said, reaching for my files, "I need to brief you on everything I've been compiling on the civilian side. This is bigger than one HOA fight." Tuesday's security brief revealed just how big. Over 8 months, Linda's network had collected daily family routines and movement patterns, children's school and extracurricular schedules, spouse workplace locations and work hours, home security setups and potential weak points, financial info including mortgage data and debt loads, medical and mental health details for family members. "Whoever designed this knows what they're doing," Colonel Webb said after reviewing the charts. "This looks like professionally guided targeting of base personnel through their families." At that point, this stopped being a neighborhood problem. It became a federal investigation. Wednesday, I received formal authorization as garrison commander to treat this as interference with military operations and threats to force protection. The Military Family Protection Act gives commanders specific authority to investigate when civilian actions systematically endanger service members or their families. Most people think a commander's reach ends at the base fence. It doesn't. When civilian behavior undermines operational readiness or security, we're not just allowed to respond, we're required to. Translation: Linda Ashford was about to learn that harassing a colonel is not the same as tattling about long grass. Thursday afternoon, I made the call. This is Colonel Hicks, Garrison Commander, Fort Carson. I'm formally requesting civilian intervention authority under Section 1482, Title 18, United States Code. We have evidence of systematic interference with military operations and coordinated harassment of service members' families. The answer came within 6 hours. Request approved. I was authorized to conduct a formal investigation and pursue remedies under federal statutes. The following morning at 0600, my home office turned into a mini war room. Fresh printer ink and coffee scented the air as I covered tables and walls with timelines, charts, and legal references. Operation Neighborhood Justice had begun. First step, prep the Garrison Command Office. As commander, I could summon civilians for formal interviews when their actions affected base security. That meant setting up our conference room like any other investigative venue, recording equipment, evidence boards, legal forms, everything needed to make the results stick in court. Military planning thrives on detail. Every contingency gets a column, every outcome a branch on the chart. I spent Saturday with base legal, locking in what we call civilian intervention protocols. Most civilians don't realize, when they systematically target service members, they kick in legal mechanisms written specifically to protect us and our families. Major Patricia Stevens from JAG flipped through my packet like she just opened a Christmas present. "Colonel, this is textbook," she said. "You've documented harassment, interference with military duties, false police reports, and attempts to compromise security. Federal prosecutors are going to love this." Sunday, we quantified the damage. Harassment doesn't just hurt feelings. It costs money and opportunities which courts take very seriously. We calculated conservative estimates for each impacted family. Lost educational opportunities, $15,000. Counseling and mental health support, $8,000. Forced relocation expenses, $12,000. Lost spousal work and advancement, $25,000. Property value damage, $18,000. Across 12 families, that put documented economic harm just under $400,000. Those numbers get attention. Monday began the coalition-building phase. If there's one thing military families do well, it's link up and support each other under fire. Captain Rodriguez coordinated contact with targeted families in 3 subdivisions. Master Sergeant Johnson compiled case histories from his neighborhood. Lieutenant Colonel Davis brought in Reserve JAG expertise. Major Thompson's wife organized a spouse support network for harassment victims. By Tuesday night, we had 12 primary families with documented harassment, 8 witness families who'd observed patterns, 4 legal professionals with military family protection experience, 2 mental health counselors specializing in harassment trauma, 1 investigative journalist interested in systemic discrimination against military families. Linda had gone up against people trained to plan operations and document everything. Wednesday, I formalized the legal backbone of the case. Targeting service members through their families isn't just mean-spirited. It's a form of economic and psychological warfare that can degrade unit performance and readiness. That's why the Military Family Protection Act makes systematic harassment a federal issue. Our ability to do our jobs depends on knowing our families are safe. Translation: messing with military families is treated as a threat to national security, not a neighborly spat. Thursday afternoon, preparation moved into its final stage. We drafted a formal summons for Linda to appear at my garrison office to answer questions about interference with military operations and harassment of protected families. Her options would be simple: come voluntarily, or be brought in by federal marshals under arrest warrants for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Friday morning brought one last wild swing from Linda before the hammer fell. At 0730, my doorbell rang, followed immediately by frantic knocking. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a city inspector uniform, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Colonel Hicks?" "Dave Patterson, City Building Inspection. I need to perform an immediate safety inspection based on urgent complaints about structural violations and potential hazards." The smell of corruption hung on him like cheap aftershave. His hands trembled slightly on the clipboard. His eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "What violations, exactly?" I asked, thumbing my phone to record. Unauthorized fence modifications, unsafe electrical work, and..." He squinted at his notes. "Potential explosive material storage related to your military background." Linda had just accused a U.S. Army colonel of stockpiling explosives in his suburban home. I invited Patterson in, poured coffee, and called Major Stevens on speaker. By cup 2, the inspector's conscience caught up. "Sir, I've never seen complaints this prepared," he admitted. The caller supplied detailed property layouts, utility lines, even notes on where to check for problems. "Like a briefing," I said. "Yes, sir. With photos and what looked like utility records." This wasn't a normal neighbor tip. Linda had run full reconnaissance on my house and then fed a scripted narrative to city officials. We were well past petty grievances now. That afternoon, the attack turned personal for my kids. When I pulled into the school pickup lane, Emma rushed to my truck in tears. "Daddy, Mrs. Morrison said you might go to jail because you're dangerous to the neighborhood." Rage tasted metallic again. Jake slid into the passenger seat, bewildered. Tommy's mom told him military dads sometimes snap and hurt people. She asked if you get scary at home. Linda had expanded her psychological operation to 8-year-olds, planting the idea that their own parents might become violent. That evening, Rodriguez called with more intel from district offices. "Marcus, you're not going to like this," he warned. "Linda's been requesting detailed info on military kids, emergency contacts, medical notes, therapy appointments, even psychological evaluations for kids with deployed parents. She claims it's for neighborhood emergency planning. She was building vulnerability profiles on our children." Wednesday, Lieutenant Colonel Webb delivered the confirmation I'd been dreading. "Colonel, we traced some of those information requests to external entities with foreign ties," she said. "Someone's paying for detailed data on base personnel families, and it appears Linda is the collection point." "You're saying she's working for foreign intelligence?" I asked. "We're saying someone with resources and training is using her network to gather intelligence on military families. Whether she understands who's behind it is unclear, but the pattern looks more like professional targeting than random harassment." The next day, my security cameras added visual proof. They captured Linda in her driveway meeting 2 unknown individuals. They reviewed documents and photographs, gestured toward various houses, including mine, and what looked very much like money changed hands. The footage was clear enough for plate numbers and faces, and our audio pickups caught enough fragments to indicate external coordination. Linda Ashford had just stepped over the line into potential national security threat. Federal agencies with 3-letter acronyms took point from there. Friday, my secure line rang. "Colonel Hicks, this is Special Agent Patricia Morrison, FBI Domestic Security Division. Your base security inquiry uncovered activity requiring federal intervention under the Military Family Protection Act and related national security statutes." The brief she sent over expanded the scope beyond anything I'd originally imagined. "Our working theory," she said, "is that this network has been conducting intelligence gathering on military families for potential exploitation. Your documentation gives us probable cause for a full federal investigation." Saturday morning, Linda attempted one final, spectacularly ill-advised maneuver. I was drinking coffee on the back deck when multiple vehicles rolled to a stop out front. 2 news vans, a radio truck, several cars full of people with cameras and notepads. Linda had convened a press conference. On my street, reporters set up tripods while she took her position at the property line, navy blazer pressed, expression solemn with self-assigned importance. "Thank you for coming," she announced, voice amplified just enough to carry. "Today, I'm exposing a pattern of military intimidation and veteran misconduct that threatens civilian families in our community." I watched from my kitchen window, coffee in hand, fully aware that federal agents had already been recording her movements for a week. Her performance was something to behold. She accused military families of running psychological warfare against civilians, misusing combat training to intimidate neighbors, and hiding behind veteran status to dodge accountability for criminal behavior. Colonel Marcus Hicks, she proclaimed while pointing at my house, represents everything wrong with military privilege in civilian neighborhoods. This man has abused government resources and veteran sympathy to harass law-abiding citizens who just want peace. The irony could have clogged a drain. Then she stepped over a whole new line. We demand the immediate removal of Colonel Hicks from base command, she declared, and the creation of military-free zones in civilian neighborhoods to protect our children from veterans who bring combat mentality into peaceful communities. On camera, in front of multiple news outlets, while under active surveillance by federal agents investigating her for discrimination against military families. She had just publicly advocated illegal housing discrimination against veterans in broadcast quality HD. By Sunday, Agent Morrison was downright cheerful on the phone. "Colonel, that press conference was a gift," she said. She clearly stated discriminatory intent, tied it directly to veteran status, and did it on camera with the whole network present. It's exactly what we needed. Monday, we coordinated final steps with base security and federal prosecutors. Surveillance confirmed Linda's network had been gathering intel on at least a dozen military families across 3 states. The scope and organization were chilling. Wednesday evening, Morrison called again. "We're executing arrest warrants tomorrow for Linda Ashford and 3 co-conspirators," she said. "You're authorized to issue a formal command summons. She can walk in under her own power or arrive with federal escorts." Thursday at 0800, I made the call. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Colonel Marcus Hicks. You are hereby summoned to appear at the Fort Carson Garrison Command Office at 1400 hours today for formal questioning regarding interference with military family security and systematic harassment of base personnel." Her response was pure Linda. "You can't order me around. This is civilian jurisdiction, not your base. Ma'am, under federal law, commanders are authorized to investigate systemic targeting of service members' families. Your choice is simple. Appear voluntarily, or federal marshals will escort you under an arrest warrant." There was a 30-second silence on the line where I could almost hear reality rearranging itself in her head. Then, "Fine, I'll come. But I'm bringing my lawyer." "Of course," I said. "We'll see you at 1400. Game on." At exactly 1400, Linda's white BMW rolled up to the main gate like a lone car approaching a checkpoint in hostile territory. From my office window, I watched security run a thorough vehicle search. Back in the command conference room, the air smelled of fresh paper and coffee. Evidence boards covered 3 walls. Timelines and damage assessments sprawled across tables. Recording gear was set to capture every word. Base security escorted Linda down a corridor lined with photos of Medal of Honor recipients. She clutched her designer purse like a shield. "Mrs. Ashford," I said as she sat across from me, "thank you for coming voluntarily. Present are Special Agent Morrison with the FBI, Major Stevens from JAG, and Captain Rodriguez as witness coordinator." The color drained from her face as she took in the assembled panel and the evidence all around. "I demand to know why I'm being treated like a criminal," she said, summoning that customer service desk outrage she usually reserved for teenagers at grocery stores. "Ma'am," Agent Morrison replied evenly, "you're here because our investigation into harassment of military families has surfaced potential federal crimes. We'll begin with your recorded statement from last Friday." She pressed play. "This should be the final complaint we need. Once they remove him from base command, we can get the rest of these military families out of our neighborhood." Linda blinked as her own voice filled the room. "Mrs. Ashford," I said, gesturing to the wall charts. "These displays document 47 harassment incidents against 12 military families over 8 months. Care to explain this pattern?" Photos of citations, dated police reports, HOA violations, school complaints, city inspections, all mapped onto a single damning timeline. "This is military intimidation," she shot back. "You're treating civilians like prisoners of war." "Ma'am," Major Stevens said, calm but razor-sharp, "the Military Family Protection Act allows federal investigation when civilians systematically target service members' families. Your actions meet that threshold regardless of your personal feelings about it." We walked her through each phase of her campaign. Every false police report, cross-referenced with security footage refuting it. Every HOA citation, paired with near-identical civilian infractions that received only warnings. Every school complaint, highlighted for discriminatory language. The turning point came when Agent Morrison switched the screen to video from Linda's own press conference. We demand the immediate removal of Colonel Hicks from base command and the establishment of military-free zones in civilian neighborhoods to protect our children from veterans who bring combat mentality into peaceful communities. Mrs. Ashford, Morrison said, that is a public call for discriminatory housing practices against veterans, a protected class under federal fair housing law. It also confirms your intent to target military families because of their service connection. Watching herself on screen, backed by news logos and microphones, the bravado drained from Linda's features. Then came the final blow. These stills show you meeting with individuals who provided detailed intelligence on military families, I said, indicating surveillance shots from her driveway. Our investigation found foreign-linked entities funding this information gathering. Linda sagged in her chair. She thought she was waging a personal crusade over parking and HOA rules. Instead, she was sitting in a federal interview tied to national security concerns. Mrs. Ashford, I said quietly, you called the police on me for parking at my own home. Now you're facing federal civil rights charges, conspiracy counts, and potential espionage-related offenses. Sometimes the system really does work the way it's supposed to. Outside, the Colorado flag snapped in the wind beneath the stars and stripes, while federal agents finalized arrest paperwork for people who tried to wage war on military families and lost. What came next moved with the speed and precision of a well-run operation. Within 72 hours, federal prosecutors filed charges against Linda and 3 of her inner circle for systematic harassment of a protected class, conspiracy to interfere with military operations, filing false police reports, violating veteran housing protections under federal fair housing law. Faced with potential federal prison time, Linda did what people like her usually do. She tried to flip. She turned over everything she knew about the outside consultants who'd fed her targeting data. Investigators discovered her network had amassed detailed dossiers on military families across 3 states, kids' routines, spouses' jobs, security setups, medical vulnerabilities. Someone had built a playbook for exploiting service members through their families. In the end, the court ordered roughly $400,000 in restitution for the 12 primary families, plus civil penalties for civil rights and conspiracy violations. Linda lost her HOA post. Her husband lost his city planning role. Her co-conspirators saw their careers in housing, education, and zoning end overnight. But the most important outcome went beyond money and punishment. The case set a clear precedent. Systematically targeting military families is not a petty neighborhood issue. It's a serious federal matter with teeth. Here's what every military family needs to understand about the Military Family Protection Act. If civilians coordinate harassment or discrimination against you because of your service connection, you are protected under federal law. But you must document everything, every notice, every remark, every pattern. Maplewood changed almost overnight. The old HOA board was dissolved and replaced with a more balanced group that included military representation. New rules banned selective enforcement and created transparent processes for genuine complaints without singling out protected groups. My kids bounced back faster than I did. Emma got her safety patrol captain badge back and secured her spot in advanced academics. Jake won a seat in student government and helped launch an anti-bullying initiative focused on protecting military kids and other targets of harassment. Dad's dementia symptoms even eased a little. Without constant neighborhood tension, he slept better, spent more time in his tomato patch, and began sharing stories with neighborhood kids who now saw him as the neighborhood war hero instead of some unstable veteran. Base leadership approved Sarah's early return from Germany, acknowledging that family stability is mission-critical. The twins getting to run into both our arms at the airport hammered home why this fight had mattered. The ripple effects reached far beyond our street. The investigation led to the creation of the Military Family Welcome Network, a program now active in 12 states that helps service members integrate into civilian neighborhoods and provides clear channels for reporting harassment and discrimination before it spirals. Once local communities saw the full picture, attitudes shifted. They began to recognize that military families bring stability, skills, and strong values, along with steady income that boosts local economies. Property values in areas known for supporting veterans actually ticked up. People wanted to live where neighbors respected service. Fort Carson started hosting an annual community festival celebrating civilian-military cooperation. Proceeds fund scholarships, veteran services, and local improvement projects that benefit everyone. As for Linda, she ultimately served 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Her co-conspirators earned shorter sentences but permanent bans from positions touching housing, education, or community planning. Investigators traced some of the money and guidance behind their operation to foreign-funded organizations trying to amplify distrust between military and civilian communities. Linda turned out to be an unwitting asset, not a trained spy, but the network she fed was dismantled, and several foreign nationals were expelled for their involvement. Every military family deserves to live in peace, not under siege, for the simple act of serving their country. Targeting us through our spouses and kids doesn't just violate decency. It undermines national defense. If you're dealing with HOA harassment, selective enforcement, or coordinated targeting because of your military connection, start a paper trail and contact-based legal. These protections exist, but they only work if you use them. Now it's your turn. Drop your HOA horror stories in the comments. You'd be surprised how many military families have run into civilians who think veteran is a synonym for punching bag. And if you want more stories where military justice dismantles civilian harassment, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. We're just getting started exposing the people who go after our families and think they'll never face consequences. Next week, how I used my security clearance to uncover a contractor fraud scheme skimming $2.3 million from veteran benefits. If you thought Linda was bad, wait until you meet the city official who tried to shut down our base because he figured veterans get too many perks. Military families serve this country, but that doesn't mean we have to quietly endure abuse from people who see our dedication as weakness. Sometimes the strongest way to support the troops is to make sure their families can live in safety and dignity. Welcome home, and thank you for serving and for standing with the families who carry that service on their shoulders. Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where HOA Karens finally meet their match. If this tale made you cheer or cringe, hit like, leave your reaction in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next wild HOA story.